Dean Martin once said the best way to get through life was to make it look easy. For decades, he did exactly that, cigarette loose between his fingers, a half-smile carved into his face like it had always belonged there. A glass in hand that may or may not have actually been whiskey, the world bought every second of it. But behind that effortless cool lived a man built from steel-town poverty, backroom gambling, busted knuckles, and a grief so total it eventually swallowed him whole. And at the center of the storm that finally broke him was the man the world always assumed was his closest brother, Francis Albert Sinatra. Their falling out never made headlines with a dramatic announcement, no press conference, no bitter interview, no public explosion. Dean simply vanished from Frank's orbit, quietly, completely, the way a light disappears when someone flips the switch from another room. No farewell, no explanation, just silence where a 30-year friendship used to be. The people who loved them both were left searching for answers that never came publicly. But the answers existed. They were buried under years of loyalty, patience, and one night in Beverly Hills that Dean Martin never forgot and never forgave. To understand how two legends end, you first have to understand how one of them began. Dino Paul Crocetti came into the world on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio, a hard, unromantic industrial town built on sweat, steel, and the kind of stubbornness that gets passed down through generations like a family heirloom nobody asked for. He was a restless kid, with no clear direction and no obvious path forward. School didn't hold him. The language barrier made him feel like an outsider, even in his own country. So at 15, he climbed into boxing rings under the name Kid Crochet, taking punches that rearranged his face and taught him something formal education never could: how to get back up when everything in your body is telling you to stay down. He lost more fights than he won. His nose got broken, his lips split, his pride absorbed hits that would have permanently flattened most teenagers. But each time he hit the canvas, he discovered something underneath the pain: a refusal, a stubborn, burning need to prove everyone wrong that he couldn't fully explain but couldn't ignore either. When boxing stopped paying, the streets offered other options. He worked in an illegal gambling room hidden behind a tobacco shop, watching powerful men conduct business in whispers and learning how control was performed long before he ever set foot on a legitimate stage. Through all of it, the voice was always there, rich, warm, and effortless, the kind of voice that made rooms go quiet without demanding anything. He started singing under the name Dino Martini, inspired by an opera singer he admired, performing with local bands and slowly building something real from almost nothing. When bandleader Sammy Watkins told him to drop the operatic weight of Martini and simplify, he listened. Dean Martin. Two words that would eventually mean something enormous, though at the time they were just a young man's best guess at what reinvention might look like. New York in the 1940s was a grind. He shared a cramped apartment with fellow dreamer Sonny King, and the two were so broke they once charged neighbors to watch them box bare-knuckle in the living room. Desperate, ridiculous, and completely alive in a way only genuine hunger produces. He performed in smoky clubs to late-night crowds who weren't really listening. Hollywood scouts came around occasionally, whispered about potential, then vanished without a callback. Success stayed just close enough to keep him reaching and just far enough away to keep burning. Then August of 1944 introduced him to Jerry Lewis. Their first meeting at the Glass Hat Club was brief and surface level on the outside. But 2 years later, on July 24, 1946, they took the stage together at the 500 Club in Atlantic City and nearly destroyed their futures in the first 20 minutes. The crowd sat stone-faced. The club owner was furious and counting down, so they threw out the script entirely and went on pure instinct. Dean stood at the center of the stage, radiating a calm, unshakable cool, the kind of effortless confidence that makes audiences trust a performer completely without knowing why. And then Jerry Lewis erupted into the space around him like a controlled explosion, toppling props, breaking the fourth wall, and destroying every expectation the audience had walked in holding. The crowd went from polite silence to helpless laughter in under a minute. Something real had been born, louder and stranger than anything either man could have manufactured alone. Martin and Lewis became a phenomenon almost overnight. Radio, film, television, the works. Their appearance on what would eventually become The Ed Sullivan Show introduced them to the entire country in one electric broadcast. By 1949, they had their own radio show and a major film deal. The money came in waves, so did the complications. Dean had always understood his role in the partnership. He was the anchor, the cool one, the center of gravity around which Jerry's chaos orbited. He was fine with it at first, but as the years accumulated and Jerry's wild energy consistently drew the louder applause, something quiet and corrosive built inside Dean. He saw clearly that he was being steadily reduced. On July 25, 1956, exactly a decade after their debut, they performed together for the last time. The breakup shocked the public. Dean didn't appear shocked at all. He rebuilt slowly and with purpose. Solo albums showcasing a voice deepened by age and experience. Film roles that proved he could hold a scene entirely on his own. His performance in The Young Lions alongside Montgomery Clift and Marlon Brando genuinely stunned critics who had dismissed him as a lightweight comedian with good hair. He wasn't Jerry's sidekick anymore. He was something harder to define and considerably more interesting because of it. And then came Frank. Their friendship solidified during the filming of Some Came Running in 1958, though they had moved in overlapping circles for years before that. What began as professional respect deepened quickly into something that resembled a real brotherhood. Frank Sinatra was magnetic in a way that was nearly impossible to resist, a force of personality that pulled everyone into his gravitational field and made them feel chosen simply for being nearby. Dean felt it too, and for a long time that feeling seemed worth everything that came attached to it. The Rat Pack years were real, and they were extraordinary. At the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, Dean, Frank, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop created something no promoter could have manufactured deliberately. A genuine chemistry between men who actually liked each other, who competed and needled and pushed limits inside a framework of deep mutual respect. The shows were unpredictable in the very best sense. Songs dissolved into jokes. Jokes dissolved into chaos. Chaos somehow reorganized itself into music. Dean would be mid-verse and Frank would cut in purely to make him laugh, and the audience would lose itself completely because the whole thing felt utterly real. Because it was. Beyond the entertainment, there was substance. When segregated venues tried to split their audiences along racial lines, Dean and Frank refused to perform. No negotiation, no compromise. No paycheck large enough to make it acceptable. They stood together on that, and it cost them nothing long-term, because the public understood these men meant exactly what they were doing. Their personal loyalty ran just as deep, until the night it didn't. June 7th, 1966, Dean's 49th birthday. The celebration was held at the Polo Lounge inside the Beverly Hills Hotel. One of those rooms where old money and new fame sat comfortably under soft lighting and the low murmur of people accustomed to getting what they want. Dean had every reason to celebrate. His television show was pulling enormous audiences. Las Vegas put his name on marquees, visible halfway down the strip. Frank was there as always, still commanding every room he entered, newly swept up in his romance with 20-year-old Mia Farrow, and carrying the particular energy of a man who had spent his entire life believing the rules were suggestions that applied to other people. A few tables away, businessman Frederick Weissman sat quietly with an older woman companion, trying to enjoy a peaceful drink in a place that cost enough to guarantee exactly that. After a while, he turned and politely asked the group to lower the noise. He acknowledged the women nearby. He wasn't issuing a challenge. He wasn't picking a fight. He was making a reasonable request in a public space. Frank Sinatra did not receive it that way. What happened next has never been fully untangled from the different stories that swirled around it. Witnesses gave contradicting versions that time has only blurred further. Some accounts say harsh words were exchanged, words that crossed lines no amount of charm could smooth over afterward. Others describe furniture moved violently, a phone ripped from a table and thrown across the room. Some claim fists flew and bodies crashed, but every version, regardless of its details, ends in the same place: Frederick Wiseman on the floor, motionless, a fractured skull, a coma, sirens pulling up outside, Sinatra's people sweeping him from the hotel before anyone with a badge could ask a single question. Dean Martin went home that night earlier than expected. His daughter noticed immediately. The quiet was wrong, heavier than usual. He sat with it briefly before saying only that Frank had lost control, that he couldn't let things go. When she pressed, asking if someone had been hurt, he said nothing. The silence was its own complete answer. Wiseman eventually survived. No charges were ever filed. Sinatra stayed out of public view while the story circulated and then slowly dissolved the way scandals do when the right people have enough money and enough lawyers. But something didn't dissolve. It stayed exactly where it had landed, inside Dean Martin, lodged there permanently, unmovable. He had spent his entire adult life constructing a world that felt manageable and quiet at its center. He loved his children with a depth he almost never discussed publicly. He preferred small dinners to loud spectacle. He could perform the chaos masterfully, but he had never wanted to live inside it. Frank Sinatra lived inside it completely and without apparent discomfort. The birthday night at the Polo Lounge didn't just disturb Dean, it clarified something he had probably been circling for years without quite naming it. The calls slowed, then stopped. No confrontation, no ultimatum, just distance that gradually hardened into something permanent. Then, March 21st, 1987, and everything else became secondary. Dean's son, Dean Paul Martin, Dino, had built a life that carried his father's effortless charisma and added his own particular discipline. He acted, sang, played professional tennis at a competitive level, and then shocked everyone who thought they understood him by enlisting in the California Air National Guard and becoming a fighter pilot. Dean watched with a pride that always carried fear mixed through it. On that March morning, Dino's jet disappeared during a routine training flight over the California desert, swallowed by storm clouds, then silence. The search lasted days. Dean paced through his house endlessly. He smoked through the nights. He consulted psychics and held on to any fragment that might constitute hope. Frank Sinatra appeared beside him during those days, quiet, steady, present, having lost his own mother in a plane crash near those same mountains years earlier. Two men standing inside a grief that made every old wound feel completely irrelevant. The wreckage was found 3 days later on the cold slope of San Gorgonio Mountain. Dino was 35 years old. Something inside Dean Martin never fully reassembled after that day. Frank organized a reunion tour, genuinely believing that the lights, the crowds, and the old Brotherhood might reach Dean and pull him back toward himself. It couldn't. The stage felt wrong. The lights were too bright for a man who wanted shadow. Lyrics slipped away mid-song. Smiles arrived half a second late. One night, after a performance that fell apart visibly in front of a full house, Dean walked off stage, closed the hotel room door behind him, and simply stopped. No announcement, no explanation given to anyone. He was done, and every person who had ever known him understood immediately that he meant it completely. He spent his remaining years in the peace he had always genuinely wanted underneath all the performance. Small dinners, old movies, people around him who needed absolutely nothing from him. He died on Christmas morning, 1995, leaving behind a legacy so vast and made to look so effortless that most people never paused long enough to consider what it had actually cost him. The friendship with Frank Sinatra was never formally ended. It had simply run its course through anger, through grief, and through the particular exhaustion that comes from being needed in ways that leave no room for a man to be quietly and honestly himself. Dean never went on record about it with any real specificity. He didn't need to. The silence was its own complete statement, and for a man who understood the power of what you choose not to say, it was the loudest thing he ever communicated. Two kings, one era. A story that could only end the way real stories do, not with a curtain call and applause, but with one man walking out a side door into the dark, finally headed somewhere that was entirely, irreversibly his own.